Hello and welcome to part 2 of my playthrough of The New Order, The Last Days of Europe, specifically the OAA's storyline. Last we left off, our task forces had completed their missions, so we're going to send out some new ones. I'm going to send somebody to spy on the Japanese, I think. Gonna survey the territory to boost my legitimacy. I guess I should actually explain how this system works here. So, there's these three resources: militarization, legitimacy, and supply. Supply is how much stuff you have. Legitimacy is basically your reputation with your like parent nation, and militarization is like the security you have in your territory. So, what I'm doing is I'm spending like some supply here to boost patrols over here, which will give me more militarization. Then I spend militarization doing missions like in enemy territory and such, which increases my legitimacy, that sort of thing. And it's a when you do these sort of trades, if you will, in the system, you actually usually get more out of it than you started with. So it's a trick to try to chain a bunch of those things together. All right. Anyways. I'll send somebody to conduct some jet flyovers to gain political power, which is a resource I can spend to make certain decisions. You can think of it as being like how much political power we have in the Antarctic base itself. And I'm gonna increase patrol rates further. Alright. The Malaysian war seems to be going on. It won't be too much longer before we can help. And it seems like I now have a story here. No risk too small. Kenneth Wallman kept his hands behind his back and watched as the heart of McMurdo's nuclear reactor came to life. The loud thuds that echoed across the building every time they probed the core were something that Wallman had grown to be accustomed to. He could see the excited glances that the new engineers shared with one another. Nobody could blame them. McMurdo's nuclear reactor was truly a sight to behold, helping to sustain the lives of up to 1,500 people in the largest settlement on the continent, and all that thanks to a core not much bigger than an oil drum. His new colleagues kept their childlike wonder as he took them around the facility. Nuclear energy had the potential to bring good to many people. The new researchers were evidently thrilled about it, and Wallman couldn't say he wasn't too. But no matter how much time he spent near it, every time Wallman looked at that small core, every time he heard its ominous call, he felt itching doubt. The reactor was powerful, but fragile. A small slip could upend the OFN's entire Antarctic project. Worse than that, it could cost lives. Too many of them. He couldn't let it happen. Not in his watch. He turned to the new engineers and put up his best smile. Let's review the safety procedures. Alright. I am also going to improve comm links with New Zealand. That should help with cohesion. And promote some Australian officers. I'm also going to request some American military equipment. That'll help if we get involved in what's going on in Malaysia. A phone call. When Howard Beale was assigned to Antarctica, the last thing he expected to do frequently was pick up a phone. Telecommunications didn't exist in Antarctica until very recently, when the OAA installed a series of landlines that interconnected the entire territory with Australia and New Zealand and, with an extension, the rest of the world. So when the phone rang, Beale truly had no idea who could be calling. Today, however, Beale would be the one doing the calling. He needed to speak to his counterparts back in Australia, responsible for handling the logistics for the for the Australian contingent of the OFN's territory on the continent. Listen, he said, we can exert more influence over how the territory is used, its management, its personnel, but to do that we need infrastructure to keep pace with the Americans. I'm not asking for the moon, I'm asking for a few bloody snowcats. Beale waited for the man on the other end of the line to finish his customary spiel about logistical difficulties and transit times before adding, I know the cabinet's going to get the transcripts of this call, so I'll say this. A moment is fast approaching wherein Australia can make a great contribution to world freedom. A moment to police our own backyard and strike back against the Japanese enemy who jump at the chance to have us blockaded, starving, and on our knees. You ask me, a few snowcats and habitats is a small price to pay to stop that from happening. The choice is yours, gents. I think I'll turn on the music. But very quiet. If it's too loud, it'll distract me. Sorry, I have a bit of gunk in my throat. Departure. William Rip Robertson watched the coast of Antarctica recede in the troop ship's wake. He was glad to be putting the cold behind him. Antarctica was never his long-term mission. He couldn't care less for the politicking of the territories. For all intents and purposes, MACASOG, Military Assistance Command Antarctica Studies and Observations Group, was a front for all of Rip's secret work in the Indian Ocean, ranging from the east coast of Africa to the Philippines. Antarctica itself was a sideshow, a convenient excuse to reallocate resources to Rip's team. For today's trip, Antarctica, or rather Vice Admiral Rayborn, had provided the cover of a ship bursting with reinforcements for the Malaysian freedom fighters, the perfect guise for the agents of the Central Intelligence Agency. Rip turned away from the frozen shoreline toward fellow CIA operative Grayson Lynch and said, I'm looking forward to the jungles in Malaysia. Anything's better than this shithole. Lynch offered Rip a cigarette. I kinda like this place, Lynch said. It's got its own charm. Well, that's because you're a cold-hearted bastard, but to each his own. Lynch grinned. He lowered his voice. Operation sequence is on schedule. The boys are perfectly convincing as Japanese infantrymen. Only a few needed a refresher course on Japanese. The rest were fluent. As a matter of fact, we'd better be careful they don't get seen by our guys. We wouldn't want Americans shooting Americans. Japanese Americans, Rip corrected. The start of something. So, how the Antarctic military works, we don't have like a conventional regular military. Instead, we have the CIA sending black operatives using Antarctica's resources. So it's like there's a black site from Antarctica. They're staging operations. So we just have one division, but it's a very elite division. And I think we also have Makasog operations. Basically, we have this stuff called command power, and if we get enough command power points, we can send in some air supply and do other, sketchy CIA stuff, which can help tilt the war in the favor of our side. So, to reiterate what this war is about is the Japanese have conquered Malaysia and set up a puppet state there. There's some people there that are having a revolution against the Japanese occupiers, and the U.S. actually has their support too. And so we are being sent in to help with that, behind the scenes in our CIA sort of way. Actually, I'm going to hold off on upgrading our generals, if you will. Rip is considered a field marshal mechanically, and Grayson Lynch is a general, because he's more behind the scenes, if you will. I'm just checking some things real quick. Alright. Our forces will arrive eventually. Meanwhile, dreaming at the edge of the world, the crunch of snow beneath boots greeted Edmund Hillary as he emerged from his tent. Stretching in the hazy light, he admired the view. This was the dream, living on the edge of civilization, exploring the farthest reaches of Earth, and working with like-minded scientists and explorers. If only life could be so simple. Unfortunately for Hillary and his dreams, the land before him was scarred and divided by the infernal posturing of empires. A state of Cold War reigned over the continent, just as it did over the wider world. The exploration of the planet, once the endeavor of intrepid pioneers, was now solely carried out in the name of expansion and one-upmanship. That was why Hillary had eagerly accepted this position representing New Zealand in the OAA. He was here to see the sights and challenge himself, of course, but the moment he got the invitation from his government, he knew this. He knew his moment to dream. He knew this was his moment to dream bigger. He yearned for a slice of the world, however small, primarily committed to the preservation and expansion of the human spirit. It might seem a distant fantasy now, but as God was his witness, he could do his best to see it done. It was not easy attempting to pursue a policy of humanism in these harsh environs. Rayborn, Beale, Reedy, these were men wholly focused on carrying out their orders, or looking out for their own self-interests. Were they bad men? No. Hillary liked them well enough, but they did not share his vision for a peaceful and cooperative administration, one that would spite the Germans and Japanese by working with others, not by shunning them and turning inwards. Gaze sweeping the snowy fields, he was warmed by a wanton determination. Searching for hope, the exile gazed back. And that's when my forces have arrived. And it's also... I now have the command power I needed. I need to start dropping in some air supplies. Alright, the lost soldiers. As the 4 Japanese servicemen trudged through the Malayan jungle, they were approached by 2 lost-looking Japanese infantry. Thank God we finally found someone, one of the men began. We got separated from our unit, and we haven't seen any friendly faces in days. By the way, could we have some of your water? Yes, of course, the officer said, handing over his canteen. Give this other man your canteen, the officer ordered one of his men. What's your unit? 422nd, the other lost man said, downing the canteen. I'm Sadao, but folks just call me Lefty. And there's Takia. I've not heard of the 442nd. Well, that's because we're new here, Takia interrupted. Our unit stationed at Hill 103 by Garrick. The officer whistled. That's quite a ways from here. How'd you end up so far away? Like I said, we're lost, Takia continued. Could you point us in the direction of your headquarters? Sure thing, the officer said, pulling out a map. Now we are here, the man said, pointing at the map. And HQ is here. We've been instructed not to mark HQ on our maps so that the Song Kongs won't know where HQ is if they capture our bodies. But I assure you it's here. Thank you so much, Takia said, as he and Lefty drew pistols and shot the officer and his men. Radio command, I'll get this cleaned up. Takia began. And real fucking funny, by the way, you telling him we're with the 442nd, Takia said, berating the chuckling Lefty. Olympus, this is Athens. I have those coordinates for you. Alright, I'm going to be sending in our forces. Alright, a radio and cigarettes. As codenamed Athens read out the coordinates over the radio, Olympus, a.k.a. William Rip Robertson, leaned back into his chair, sucking in a cigarette. What'd I tell you, Grayson? Like shooting pigs in a barrel. I don't think that's... Never mind. My concern, Grayson Lynch continued, was always in the cleanup. These soldiers are extremely capable, but shit happens, and we cannot afford for much shit to happen. Dear God, imagine if this got out. There's no lawyering out of that. This is a war crime. Nobody's gonna find out if we're smart about this. Besides, Rip continued, those Jap bastards deserve it. I've lost more brothers than I can count to their fake surrenders. As far as I'm concerned, this is some well-deserved payback for playing dirty. At least we aren't putting them on death marches. Don't get me wrong, I'm not making a fucking moral case against this op. I'm just saying we better cross our T's and dot our I's. You done bitching so I can call in that airstrike? Rip said, turning to exhale smoke. Rip, this ain't a joke. We gotta be diligent about this, lest we end up out of a job, or worse. I'll be sure to keep that in mind, Lynch, now. Let me smoke and radio the bomber in peace. All right. The Polar Times. This newspaper here gives little snippets of what's going on in other storylines. I'm not sure if I'm going to read all of these because at a certain point they kind of become overwhelming, but I'll try. Australian Labor Prime Minister Kim Beazley has resigned over a pork barreling scandal claimed several high profile members of the federal cabinet. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were funneled into marginal seats in a plot to steer the results in Labor's favor. Be- Beazley was not implicated, but cited his failure to turn the searchlight of absolute honesty onto his party as the reason for his resignation. Dr. Herbert E. Evatt, a leading member of the ALP's left faction, has been chosen as the party's interim leader, making him the current Prime Minister of Australia. The erratic former High Court judge will preside over the government until its parliamentary caucus convenes to elect the man who will carry it to the upcoming snap election. However, Labour's poor performance in nationwide opinion polls and Evatt's declining health have stirred rumors of a leadership change. Don't let the revolving door hit you on the backside. Alright, so our forces are moving in. Alright. Lipetsk prison breakout. Despite what little information the Germans' Reichskommissariat Moscowian, that's an occupied region of Russia, lets out of its borders, the news about its most recent failures in governance have spread well beyond the borders of the Einheitspact, which is the sort of Nazi version of the Warsaw Pact or NATO. It's the Nazis and their allies. Ivan Vorobyev, a former Red Army soldier and German collaborator turned partisan, escaped from Moscowian's Lipetsk prison in a bold breakout staged by unidentified forces. The broader Lipetsk region, formerly a hotbed of resistance, has since experienced a dramatic rise in insurgent activity, with many other regions reporting similar issues. Siegfried Kosk, the Reichskommissar of Moscowian, has already made several executive orders to quell the spread of disorder using his signature methods. Germania has refused to comment. Destiny's Call is as loud as it can be. Yeah, I'll probably not read all of those, because they're just not relevant to our own storyline. But they are interesting. Oh, it seems like some of our task forces have finished back in Antarctica. Well, it seems that the Nazis are trying something in our territory, and I'm going to send some people to intercept and make sure that doesn't happen. Alright, so our forces are our CIA guys in Malaysia seem to be doing a good job. They are currently pushing into Japanese-occupied territory and are winning. Let's read this event. Homecoming. Not since the shipment of Christmas presents from home had such a crowd gathered at the airstrip at McMurdo. The plane battling headwinds on its way to a landing wasn't carrying alcohol, cigarettes, or any other sundries which made life in Antarctica bearable. It was carrying a legend. Despite the blistering cold, soldiers and scientists grinned as the plane touched down and ground to a halt. Whispers spread like wildfire. He was on Scott's expedition in 1910, some said. He was the first person to find Scott's body. Others remarked that he was the most experienced Antarctic explorer still breathing, that he was a polymath whose scientific acumen ranged from the earthly to the cosmic, from the development of radar to the study of the sea. Howard Beale stood next to Rear Admiral Reedy on the tarmac as the plane's door slowly opened. I knew the Canadians were sending a liaison, an expert, said Beale, but Jesus, a survivor of Scott of the Antarctic expedition? I read every word the man's written about magnetic countermeasures, said Reedy. If we'd more readily adopted his proposals, the fight against the wolf packs may have gone differently. Now that he's here, maybe we can take the fight to the damn Nazis. I'm sure he's got many ideas to improve overland travel. A shadow filled the plane door, and the sunlight fell on Sir Charles Seymour Wright. At 75 years old, he was still a spry, energetic man, and he nearly bounded down the stairs with a smile on his face. The crowd cheered and applauded as the Commonwealth of Canada made its presence known in Antarctica. Wright shook Beale's hand. Good to be back, he said. Let's get to work. Yeah, there's a lot of random events in here. We actually have gotten the criticism that there's too much, and we'll be toning that down in the future. But most of them are pretty good, in my opinion. Of course, I helped write some of them. Meanwhile, in Cuba, Castro was elected. Nobody likes Castro. Except, of course, for the people who voted for him, but... Just checking some things here, making sure things are in shape back home as we continue our invasion. Alright. Call and response. When Vice Admiral Rayborn first communicated the results of the Nazi nuclear test to his superiors, he had no idea the scale of the response they would provoke. He'd naturally anticipated that the successful detonation of a Nazi atomic weapon on the Antarctic ice would set off some alarm bells in Washington, but the deluge of calls he received told him that Washington wasn't going to take this lying down. Now, staring at the written orders in front of him, he tried to put together the pieces. Several engineer units were being reassigned to Antarctica, ostensibly to shore up infrastructure and establish new defensive networks, but their accompanying material was far in excess of the jobs they would be expected to do. The personnel lists also struck Rayborn as odd. A dozen doctors of various fields, not exactly the type to hoist shovels in the frozen dark. Clearly their mission wasn't just solely about shoring up infrastructure. Apparently he was to expect a visit from some ranking officers in the Army Corps of Engineers as well, although further details were sparse. Rayborn was no stranger to military secrecy, having climbed his way up the ranks of the Navy. He wasn't concerned that he was being kept out of the loop, but it begged the question, if a vice admiral of the U.S. Navy wasn't being told what the men under his command were really up to, just how serious was this project? Rayborn was still a relative newcomer to Antarctica, but there was one thing he'd learned about the continent. It was that it was vast and there was plenty of space to hide things. He just hoped it wouldn't be hidden from him for long. So yeah, the Rayborn is going to be tasked with working on a secret project eventually. That'll be interesting. We've taken even more territory from them. And they're trying to retake what we just captured, but no, that's not working out for them at all. And we get another event. An unprecedented proposition. I get that the times are changing, but Edmund, are you insane? A woman in Antarctica, let alone one on an independent research mission, would be a disaster. It's as plain as that. Rayborn and Hillary had been talking circles for 3 hours now. Hillary had long been a proponent of opening OFN Antarctic bases to the other sex. If they didn't, then they were no better than Jerry or the so-called Pan-Asians. But despite the consent of all OFN member states, it had yet to happen. Even the National Science Foundation was starting to amend their previous declarations on the topic. So, Hillary argued, why the hell didn't the U.S. Navy simply rescind its policy on transporting women to Antarctica? He had been wearing Rayborn down for months now, pestering him with weekly meetings on the subject, but the Vice Admiral had yet to budge. Thankfully for Hillary, he had made a plan, and now was just the time to announce it. Think what you like, William, but if you won't sign off on it, then I'll have her brought in some other way. It's not as though this administration has taken a stance on her presence, so I don't see why she wouldn't be welcomed. Rayborn sighed heavily, putting his pen down and staring down Hillary for the first time this meeting. It's not as though she'll be able to get here without the acceptance of the Navy. They patrol these waters, and the moment they catch whiff of this little stunt, they'll be ready to send her straight back home. Ah, yes, the U.S. Navy, the guardian of the free enlightened world, is going to, very publicly, send a single harmless woman back home over some outdated policies. Yeah, I've already contacted some friends in New York to start assessing candidates and preparing a ship to New Zealand. All that's left to do is see if you decide to let her dock. Rayborn blanched slightly, quietly stating that he'd see what he could do. First impressions. Attention! Simon Poskowitz stood up at attention as his CO opened the door to the radio station. This is Takia Tapia and Matthew Cho. They are radio operators from New Zealand and Australia, and, as of just now, are your new co-workers. His CO ordered Simon at ease and promptly left, leaving the 3 men to their own devices. You boys want coffee? Team the 2 stranger... You boys want coffee? Sorry. You boys want coffee? Team the 2 strangers said in synchronization. There's a typo there. That's what threw me off. Minutes later, they sat in the comfortable chairs of the Radio Shack, ready to pick each other's brains. You know, you guys got the cushiest job at McMurdo Station. Simon studied the Australian up and down. If his accent and mannerisms weren't Australian, he'd have mistaken Matt for a Japanese soldier. Is that so? The Australian questioned. Yep. Take right now, for example. We got a broadcast in 5 minutes, but after that we're off the air for 5 hours. You can tell me your life story. Let's start with... Simon reached into his pocket and flipped a coin. It landed on tails. Matthew, the Australian, took a sip of tea. Well, to learn about me, I gotta tell you about my parents. They fled Chongqing with a sack of rice hours ahead of the Japs. Barely evaded them, and once they resettled in Australia, they barely escaped deportation. I've got 2 brothers, and we're all in the army. That's the short of it. Matthew and Simon stared at the New Zealander sitting betwixt them. Matt knew he was a Maori, but Simon, he had never seen a Maori in his life. All right, I'm from Wangora. You've never heard of it. I used to be a fisherman, in the family business, but the Nips overfished our village. I had to join the army to help my family pay the bills. That's the gist of it, yeah. Simon, who had opted for coffee instead, took a sip and smiled. Takia, Matthew, welcome to 104.5 McMurdo FM. This wonderful place is our working space. It's got a coffee machine, couches, a hot plate, and even emergency snacks. Don't tell anyone, though. But most importantly, we've got a space heater. Matthew and Takia started to get the feeling that they hit the lottery. Matthew knew they were going on the air soon, but he nevertheless had one final inquiry. That's great and all, but aren't you going to tell us about yourself, Simon? Simon nodded. Sure thing, but after we're off the air. We are currently charging down the collaborators and doing a pretty good job. In fact, I'm curious about something. Okay, so the leader of this territory is some sort of, like, Japanese general or something. They're managing to push back our assault, for now at least. Oh, I think we just managed to gain ground, so I think we're winning. Yeah, reinforcements are showing up. And we get another event. Where the cherry blossoms bloom. Herman Flegger walked alongside John Kennedy on what the vice president had promised him would be a most beautiful riverside stroll. The cherry blossoms had bloomed early this year in D.C., and it was as good a backdrop as any for the old acquaintances to catch up, though not without their seconds, Paul Daniels and Robert Kennedy, trailing behind them and talking animatedly. Flegger knew the Kennedys well from his time at Harvard Law, and they had watched JFK's meteoric rise from his position in Ike's DOS. They hadn't met since Flegger had been put in charge of creating the OAA, which meant he had plenty of tales of the bitter cold with which to regale the VP. You make it sound so bleak down here. Surely there's some brotherly spirit with you and your fellows. Ah, there was a topic Flegger had wanted to bring up. Unfortunately, there's less than you might think. The troops get along just fine, but each representative nation has its own vision for the continent, and I'll admit I'm worried about what might happen if those disagreements were to flare up. Kennedy was silent a moment, and the chatter of their followers and the lapping of the river, the only sounds in the fresh spring air. That does warrant some consideration. I'll have the State Department brief me on possible conciliatory measures. Our security interests aren't under threat, though, are they? Oh no, that's something we can all agree on. Even if some are more hesitant about introducing new defenses. In fact, the Navy and CIA's operations based on the continent are a model to which we should hold all our projects. Indeed, I feel those southern wastes hold more potential than we yet know. We just need to be ready to grasp it. Now then, if we could discuss this year's budget for Antarctica. And we've almost completely defeated them. Having said that, I need to retreat. Oh wait, the United States military is helping me out here, so my defense will be good. So we have the natives here, the UMAJF. We've got the U.S. military, and we've got us, the CIA. I was driven back, but the army might be able to take it from here. Alright, our group seems to be recovering now, so we're going to send them in. And our task forces are done, so we're going to send out 6 more. One moment. Alright. Increase the patrol rate. I'm going to increase more patrol rates. conduct some helicopter flyovers of enemy territory to get more legitimacy. Survey some territory. And conduct some jet flyovers. Alright, back in Malaysia. Our forces are heading into the final stretch of this war. Yeah, they seem pretty hunkered down there, but they can't hold out forever. These are Guangdong forces. These are corporate mercenaries. The Japanese also have some proxy guys there, so some of them are from Guangdong, which is the cyberpunk sort of corporate, business-run dystopia. Then there's the regular collaborators, and the Japanese army is also present. But we have an even better team than they do, so ha. Alright, poll to poll. Major Bennett L. Lewis handed his superior, Colonel John C. H. Lee, Jr., a cup of coffee. The colonel was seated on a ridge above the camp, observing the men below. Both he and Lewis are reminded of an anthill as they watched excavators break ground and men bustled hither and yon. "The plane's nearly ready, sir," Lewis said. Lee nodded. "Pretty desolate here. Greenland's not a very apt name." A history professor of mine once told me that the Vikings called this place Greenland to draw new settlers. They couldn't very well tell the people back home what the place really looked like, Lewis chuckled. I found that funny. A medieval code name. Reminds me of our work. For all Greenland's bleakness, I'm sure it'll seem like a paradise compared to our next destination, Lee sighed. Antarctica. I've served once or twice with people who've been stationed there, and they all had the same look in their eyes, like they knew what oblivion looked like, what it felt like. Lewis said towards the air... Lewis looked toward the airstrip and then at his watch. I'm sorry, sir, but we really should be going. Vice Admiral Rayborn's expecting us within the week. If we don't leave now, that storm from the west will ground us. Lee drank his coffee quickly and stood up. Let's go see what all the fuss is about down south. Farewell, Greenland. Yeah, they are holding this last city of theirs, these last two cities they have down pretty hard, but we'll get them. We'll get them eventually. An unprecedented expedition. The Institute for Polar Studies at Ohio State University was a small organization, having only been founded 2 years prior. But as Lois Jones, a chemistry master's pursuing a doctorate in geology, entered the building, she could feel that it buzzed with an uncharacteristically nervous excitement. The call of "Congratulations, Jones" greeted her as she walked further in, which led the bewildered Lois to start in the direction of the head of the Institute. Before she got there, however, Colin Bull pulled her aside and into his office. Bull was a New Zealander who had recently joined the faculty at OSU due to their specialization in Antarctic studies. He was a good man and a worthwhile connection with the land down under, especially given his inroads in his home country. "Jones, I've just gotten a call from Wellington. You're being given the go-ahead to study at McMurdo." Lois stared back in shock, her mind racing. But Bull had been pushing for the OAA to allow the first female scientist to study on Antarctica since '59, but while he'd managed to sway all the officially relevant parties, the U.S. Navy outright refused to allow her passage south. Thankfully, Bull had met Edmund Hillary a few times before, and their correspondence brought the Kiwi explorer firmly to their side. He would supposedly convinced Admiral Rayborn himself to force the issue, and now it seemed the Navy was quietly backing down. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," Lois replied, a smile flitting her face. "If you knew Hillary, you would have. Nothing deters that man," Bull said, eyes slightly wistful. He then reached under his desk, pulling out a sheaf of paper. "Here, a list of what you'll need before you leave. You'd best start preparing. You'll be flying to LA in a week." Secrets. C.S. Wright was sitting in Edmund Hillary's office when the engineers arrived. As Canadian liaisons to the OAA, he had regular meetings with McMurdo's command staff, and Hillary's office at McMurdo was situated directly across from Vice Admiral Rayborn's. The doors of both of these offices were open. Wright was halfway through a negotiation for accommodations for his fellow Canadians at one of New Zealand's research outposts when a group of Americans, army men and engineers from the looks, went trooping through the hall, carrying box upon box of file folders and documents. Wright slowly trailed off mid-sentence, cocked an eyebrow, and looked over his shoulder. The engineers filed into Rayborn's office, deposited the boxes, and left. Wright and Hillary watched for a full minute. The train never stopped. "What do you suppose that's about?" Wright asked. "Not sure," replied Hillary, "but probably new construction. Maybe McMurdo's getting some new habitats." Wright frowned and turned back to Hillary. "I wasn't informed of any expansion to the base." Hillary rolled his eyes. "Well, you know how the Yanks are. Everything's a secret. I'm sure we'll find out soon enough anyhow. It's not like you can hide much of anything down here." "Or can you?" Pert. Vice Admiral Rayborn looked at the mountains of paperwork all around him, recalled the words of General George Patton. Compared to war, all other forms of human endeavor shrink to insignificance. The boxes left behind by the Army engineers were the skeleton of an audacious project, and Rayborn had been given the responsibility of seeing it through. He knew exactly why this had landed on his desk. A few years ago, Rayborn had been given the similar task of rendering the Navy's Polaris missile functional. He had little engineering experience. He proved his worth through the effective use of PERT, Project Evaluation and Review Technique, getting the UGM-27 Polaris missile off of the ground 4 years ahead of schedule. Such a feat was rare in military development and unheard of in rocket design. For this achievement, Rayborn was promoted to Vice Admiral in 1960. "Iceman," Rayborn mouthed as he scanned the first of thousands of documents. He surmised the Army was looking to create its own niche in the nuclear triad, and they wanted his help to see it done as quickly as possible. Given the chaotic state of the project and the secrecy to which he'd been sworn, he knew he had his work cut out for him. Many of the design teams subordinated to him would have to be isolated from each other, kept in the dark. This need-to-know development would be a challenge to work around. Rayborn was puzzled at the degree of secrecy. Even the Polaris project hadn't necessitated this level of clandestine obfuscation. Of course, in a world gone mad, one can never be too careful. Rayborn knew that in due time he would be clued in onto the wider goals of Project Iceman. The Army couldn't keep the design team in the dark forever. All that was to be done now was to inform the teams of their responsibilities and to manage the project's workflow via PERT. Rayborn was hopeful that he could replicate his earlier success and maybe earn a promotion out of this frozen wasteland. The only man for the job. So now we have this thing called PERT we can use to do work on a secret project called Iceman, sometimes called Iceworm. Iceworm was a secret program the U.S. government was working on in real life. They were trying it in Greenland. But it didn't pan out for reasons. We might be able to get it to work in this timeline, though. Feel free to look that up. Project Iceworm. Checking on some things real quick. Alright. Anyways. Let's see how our liberation is going. Uh-oh. They're actually taking some land back. That's not good. Oh, and easy come, easy go. I'm going to put our guys into force attack mode, which basically will make them stronger offensively but weaker defensively, so hopefully this will give us the strength we need to punch through their forces. And yeah, it looks like that's what's going on. Uh-oh. We seem to be losing, actually. Or maybe not. Oh, no. We're turning the tide. We're starting to win. Okay, we're gaining ground here. Come on. We need to fight for democracy. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That's the CIA's slogan. An offer up north. By the time their commanding officer barged into the barracks, every soldier was already standing at attention. He huffed, maybe having expected to catch them by surprise, but all that stomping towards the door gave him away, and he continued stomping as he made his way towards the tallest soldier in the room. Private Edward Freeman held his head high, his eyes straight to the front. His CO scanned his rifle for whatever imperfection he could find, and when there was nothing, he grumbled on his breath. Good enough for a fucking Negro. It was just loud enough for Edward to hear, but he didn't say anything. The private's face stayed blank as the CO drove his gaze to the bayonet. The officer probed it for the slightest smudge. After a moment of silent tension, the CO barked out. "Private Edward, your bayonet is dull. Your 24-hour pass is revoked." Red in the face, he moved over to another victim. All the while, Edward did not move or react. A balloon of anger itched to burst in his chest, but he didn't let it. It never ended well, he told himself. It never made it better. "Gentlemen who have been granted passes may leave. The rest stay here," their CO declared, and a good chunk of the company ran off. Edward was amongst those who stayed. He stood near the same spot he had been at during inspection, overhearing two other men complaining. "That bastard's gonna wind up dead somehow." "Some way," one whispered. The other scoffed. "You watch, he'll probably get promoted. And by then I'll be out of this, even if I have to take that offer for Greenland." An offer? To get out? Edward appeared between the two soldiers, startling them. He was never good with conversation, either too dry or too convoluted, but one of the soldiers got it quickly and nodded. "Yeah, something up in Greenland. Infrastructure, they say. Pretty dull." Dull was enough for Edward. Dull was better than their commander, at least. He thanked the two men and marched off. Opportunity lies in difficulty. Alright. I'm gonna pause that to see if I can't do anything with Pert. Ooh, I like this song. Alright. Task forces in Antarctica to send out. Let's increase some patrol rates. We're a little low on manpower, but we'll do what we can to help. Alright. Rocket shopping. No two rockets were alike. The slightest change in weight, engine power, or payload capacity might mean the difference between placing a satellite in orbit or sending it to a fiery death in the upper atmosphere. One second. From a military perspective, the choice of launch vehicle was essential in determining the range and destructive capability of a missile, and nowhere was this more true than the development of nuclear weapons. Vice Admiral Rayborn had a decision to make. He had to choose between one of two launch vehicles for Iceman. The first option was the Minuteman I, a reliable three-stage rocket with which utilized cheap solid rocket fuel and required only a modest silo, very easy to build and maintain. The second option was Titan II, a two-stage liquid-fueled rocket, much larger than the Minuteman, but possessing a far greater range and payload capacity. It wasn't an easy choice. In polar climates, compacting equipment requiring minimal maintenance was generally king. Therefore, the Minuteman seemed the logical choice. On the other hand, despite the enormous engineering challenges posed by the Titan, the two-stage liquid-fueled rocket was far more flexible in terms of potential targets and warhead yield. Rayborn bemoaned the secrecy surrounding the project. If he knew more about the specifics about the missile's intended purpose, he could make a more informed choice. As it stood, he had to work with very limited data. He reduced the issue down to a simple question. Did the flexibility offered by the Titan's range outweigh the compact, low-maintenance Minuteman? I'm going to say the Minuteman 1 is well-suited to polar climates. It should be the launch vehicle. Alright, living space. Living space. It was something that they had taken for granted in most of the constituent countries of the OFN. They all had wide open spaces, vast frontiers to develop and settle. Such things didn't exist in Antarctica. Every domicile stood in stark relief against the polar desert. Every habitat, every usable space was a niche carved out of the ice and rock with blood, sweat, and tears. McMurdo occasionally received expansions, being one of the few bases still growing since the scramble for Antarctica, but these expansions were contested by the various factions on site. Right now, Hillary and Beale were meeting to discuss which of their countries would receive the latest accommodations. Australia, New Zealand, or would both share? For our part, said Beale, we would like to use the new habitats to host a contingent of Australian soldiers. It would greatly increase our capability to provide security on the continent and defend McMurdo. Hillary sighed. More soldiers, Howard? We have an opportunity to study this place in detail. For the first time in human history, who knows what discoveries await? We're committed to expanding our scientific facilities. Then why don't we divide the space more evenly? Arguing between ourselves only gives the Americans more control of McMurdo's future. Let's share the habitats equally. Your scientists will have protection, and we'll all benefit from the discoveries made. Several moments of silence passed. Alright, well, your offer is acceptable, Howard, said Hillary. We'll share the space. I don't like taking losses. Oh. And so it is that I actually lost. Not lost, but my CIA forces in Malaysia were all killed. On the plus side, I think we'll win regardless. So, it was a heroic sacrifice for the greater good of the people of Malaysia. They will not be forgotten. Breaking the ice. The clouds hanging over Antarctica muddled the line between the horizon and the snowy caps of the hills that embraced McMurdo Station, giving Lois an unusual first sight of the subject of her studies and casting the landscape in a surreal light. It was a place bereft of anything that held the eye, nigh untouched by humans, and blanketed in a serene steadiness, all of which instantly set it apart from anywhere she had been before, and to think that she had once seen parts of Ohio as being barren. Meanwhile, the early winter winds sheared her down to muscle and bones, her nerves so numb that she could hardly imagine them working properly again. This was a land so unlike any other on Earth. She had been standing at the bow since dawn, watching as her final destination drew closer. The ship taking her to McMurdo was equipped to cut through ice. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to make it to the harbor this late in fall, which meant their approach was accompanied by the cracking of ice. It was her only companion until the ship came to a grinding halt and the men started running around the deck, preparing a staircase onto the ice pier below and hauling up supplies McMurdo had left there there for them. The timing of this trip had been a tight thing, and she knew the captain was eager to be off as soon as they were reprovisioned, yeah. Shaking the numbness out of her arms and legs, she set off down the stairs, finding a small greeting party at their base. At their lead, as the one reason the Navy, had allowed her to come here at all, Edmund Hillary. The New Zealander shook her hand and introduced his companions, a couple geologists she might collaborate with and lead researcher at the base, before shepherding the group off towards some nearby vehicles. It's time to get to work. Yeah, we lost all our guys. That's kind of a bummer, but we'll win. The U.S. and the rebels will take the last section any day now. I am curious if there's something I can do to help. Nope. Okay, well, I did what I can. Taking some territory. I'm sure things will be fine. Alright, changing my attention to, well, I'll keep watching. I'm going to increase some patrol rates back home, back in Antarctica, to help make things more secure out here. I'm going to construct Australian outposts and improve comm links with New Zealand. I'm also going to promote some Australian officers. I want Australia to take over if they can, because I think Beale is the most sensible of 3 possible successors, but that might not end up happening. I've requested a progress report on the Iceman project, or Iceworm project. Project developments continues on schedule. Current milestones have been met and in some cases exceeded. Very pleased to report the team is addressing emerging issues with flying colors and great aplomb. Details to follow in regular scheduled report. Alright, I'm requisitioning some more manpower for the missile development. Alright, our allies seem to at least be holding the line against the Japanese invaders, or occupiers. They only have 4 divisions left, the enemies do, that is. So I think that despite our failures, we might win this. We're a little low on militarization in Antarctica. That's not a good sign. But we'll be fine. So, whoops. Alright, maintaining the lifeline. The skies over McMurdo Station had been draped in a deep, dark blanket. Wallman observed the stars from the window, while this radio broadcast droned on and on. Today will be chillier than yesterday, with temperatures sitting at around negative 26.5 degrees Celsius. We can also expect strong winds coming from the northwest. Having had enough, Wallman turned off the radio and let the announcer's voice fade into static. Now all that accompanied him was the howl of the wind as it battered on his dorm window. Winter in Antarctica was long and hard. Wallman knew as much. He had gone through a couple already. That dark blanket would stay over the sky for many months, breaking the spirits of men across the frozen wastes. That's why they need the energy of the nuclear reactor. Like a beating heart, it would keep the station alive through the thick and thin. All the while, Wallman was responsible for that heart. He sat on the desk and took a long sip of coffee, shifting around a pile of papers. The reactor would need more power to plow through the winter months. On top of that, it would have to keep working without malfunction. That was a real challenge. Who would have guessed that the delicate equipment doesn't always bode well with Antarctica's hostile climate? Just like humans, Wallman smirked to himself and set down his coffee. Time to get to work. Rear Admiral Reedy studied the meteorological reports, barometer readings, and temperature forecasts on his desk intently. Cozy would be a fine word to describe Reedy's office. Everything, from the desk to the cabinets, was a little smaller than their equivalents back home. Consequently, the stark white pages seemed to cover most of the desk like a perfectly rectangular snowdrift. The man who drafted the report, C.S. Wright, Canada's liaison in Antarctica, sat across from Reedy, watching the rear admiral from his deeply lined eye sockets. The Antarctic veteran seemed to fit perfectly in the cramped environs, which were assuredly more comfortable than his previous accommodations on the continent. Compared to the tents of the Terra Nova expedition, McMurdo was a 5-star hotel. The snow, Wright surmised, will be deep enough to completely isolate most of the outposts, but that's not the chief problem. The temperatures will drop so low that the ice will be too thick for icebreakers to penetrate, and the catabolic winds, well, let's just say that flying's out of the question. Bottom line, we need to develop a reserve of supply, enough to see us through any crisis. Reedy knew that meant either requisitioning more supplies from the Antarctic Development Command or turning to one of the Commonwealths for help, either Australia or New Zealand. Wright added, "The good news is the Germans and Japanese will face the same travails. For the next few months, our only enemy is Antarctica, and if we don't prepare, it will evict us." I'll talk to Howard. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to set up Australia's commitment to Antarctic security. Oop. Our allies in Malaysia have almost won. There is literally one city left for them to take. It seems that our task forces are done. I'm going to get some more militarization. It seems that our militarization in Antarctica leaves something to be desired. I'm going to survey the territory, though. Alright. So, currently I have all resources being put into increasing Antarctic security. Alright, the ice worm project is working fine so far. And it seems like the war over in Malaysia is almost finished. Almost. Let's speed the game up a little bit. some reason it's not letting us see what's going on in Malaysia, so I have to look away from that for now. Survey some territory, boost up our legitimacy. Nazi terrorist plot busted in Uruguay. A terrorist operation planned by the loathed Quinta Columna, a local pro-German forces in Uruguay, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, has been successfully busted by the Montevidean police, led by Colonel Aguarendo. According to a report given to the press, the main target of the terrorist attacks would have been the FULNA members, who are located in the Uruguayan capital and have the official support of the Uruguayan government. It is not known how the Quinta Columna managed to find out where the various FULNA members resided in, but although a Paraguayan intelligence... One second. Stop. Connection is suspected, it seems that the captured plans of the Nazi terrorists also plan to target Uruguayan communists. Fortunately, further bloodshed could be avoided, but the question of how deep the Nazi infiltration runs in Uruguay remains open. The Switzerland of America has its fair share of secrets. Alright, this is where I'm going to pause it for today. I hope you all had fun. I will see you later-ish.